Zara Emberforge had broken a man's arm once for looking at her the wrong way. So when the human stumbled into her forge at dusk with eyes like storm clouds and a mouth that curved into something between fear and fascination, she assumed he would run before she could even set down her hammer. He did not run. He stood there in the doorway, silhouetted against the dying light, his chest heaving with exertion, his travel-worn clothes speaking of long roads and longer nights, and he said the last thing she expected to hear from human lips. "Please, I need your help." Zara set the hammer down slowly, watching him with the wariness of someone who had learned early that humans did not come to orcs seeking help, unless they were desperate beyond reason. She was tall, even for an orc woman, with shoulders broad from years of working iron and arms corded with muscle that spoke of strength earned through labor rather than bloodshed. Her skin was the deep green of forest shadows, marked here and there with the small scars that came from a life spent around hot metal and sharp edges. Her tusks curved upward slightly, small enough not to impede speech but prominent enough to mark her clearly as what she was. Her black hair was pulled back in a thick braid that hung past her shoulder blades, practical and out of the way. "Help with what?" she asked, her voice carrying the rough directness that characterized her people. She did not soften her tone or try to make herself seem less intimidating. If he wanted help, he would have to ask for it properly, fear or no fear. The man took a step inside, and she saw him more clearly in the glow of her forge. He was perhaps in his mid-20s, with dark brown hair that fell across his forehead in disarray, and those remarkable gray eyes that seemed to hold both intelligence and exhaustion in equal measure. His jaw was strong, shadowed with several days of stubble, and his hands, when he held them up in a gesture of peace, were the hands of someone who knew work but not the particular work of weapons or war. "My name is Zane Yardley," he said, and his voice was steadier than she had expected. "I am a cartographer. I have been mapping the frontier territories for the past year, and 3 days ago, I made the mistake of camping in a valley that turned out to be the territory of a particularly hostile orc clan. They took my maps, my instruments, and nearly took my life. I managed to escape, but they are hunting me. I saw your forge from the ridge and thought perhaps you might let me hide here until they give up the search." Zara felt her jaw tighten. Of course. Of course it would be her own kind that he was fleeing from, and of course he would think that she might harbor him against them. The situation was complicated in ways he probably could not even fathom. If the clan discovered she had hidden a human, her own already precarious position would become untenable. She had been tolerated in this region precisely because she kept to herself, caused no trouble and, most importantly, had no dealings with humans beyond the occasional trade of metalwork for supplies. "Which clan?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "They called themselves the Bloodstone Clan," Zane said, and there it was. The Bloodstone orcs were the most aggressive in this territory, the ones who viewed any human presence as an invasion, the ones who had been responsible for more than a few raids on human settlements over the years. They were also the ones who viewed Zara herself as a traitor for choosing to live apart from clan structure, for making her living through trade rather than taking. "They will not give up the search," Zara said flatly. "If they believe you saw something of value, if they think you might report their position or their numbers to human authorities, they will hunt you until they find you or until your body is no longer worth the effort." She saw the color drain slightly from his face, but to his credit, he did not collapse or beg. He simply nodded, accepting the reality she laid out. "Then I am likely dead regardless, but I would rather die having tried every option than simply lay down in the forest and wait for them." There was something in that statement that caught at Zara in an unexpected way. Pride, perhaps, or stubbornness, the refusal to simply accept fate without fighting against it. These were qualities she understood, qualities that had driven her own decisions when she had left her birth clan years ago to make her own way in the world. "If I hide you and they discover it, they will kill us both," she said, making sure he understood the stakes. "I know," he replied. "I am asking anyway." Zara looked at him for a long moment, weighing possibilities and consequences. The smart thing would be to turn him away, to have nothing to do with this situation. The smart thing would be to preserve her own safety and let him face whatever fate awaited him in the forest. But Zara had not built her forge and her life in this isolated place by always doing the smart thing. She had done it by following an instinct that told her there had to be more to existence than constant conflict, more than the endless cycle of raiding and revenge that defined so much of orc culture. "There is a cellar beneath the forge," she said finally. "It is where I store coal and certain metals that need to be kept cool. It is not comfortable, but it is hidden. If they come searching, you will go there and you will be absolutely silent. Do you understand?" The relief that washed over his face was so profound that it transformed him entirely. He had a good face, she realized suddenly. Not handsome in the way of the merchant traders who occasionally passed through the region with their soft hands and softer lives, but good. Honest. The face of someone who said what they meant and meant what they said. "Thank you," he said, and the gratitude in his voice was genuine enough that it made her uncomfortable. She was not accustomed to gratitude from humans. Suspicion, yes. Fear, certainly. The occasional wary respect from those who needed her metalwork badly enough to overcome their prejudice. But not gratitude like this, offered freely and without calculation. "Do not thank me yet," she said gruffly. "You may find that surviving the Bloodstone clan only to spend days in a cold cellar is not much of an improvement." But she showed him the cellar anyway, lifting the heavy trapdoor that was concealed beneath a workbench laden with iron stock. The space below was indeed not comfortable, a rough stone chamber perhaps 8 feet square, with a low ceiling that would force him to stoop, and air that smelled of earth and metal. But it was hidden, and in the current situation, hidden was worth more than comfortable. "I will bring you food and water when it is safe," she said. "But you must understand that if they are truly hunting this area, there may be times when I cannot risk coming down here. You will have to be patient." "I understand," Zane said. He hesitated at the edge of the trapdoor, looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. "Why are you helping me? You do not know me. You owe me nothing. And as you said, this puts you in danger." It was a fair question, and Zara did not have a fair answer. Or rather, she had too many answers, none of which she particularly wanted to examine too closely. Because she was tired of the violence. Because she believed there had to be a better way. Because something in his eyes reminded her of the person she had been before the world had taught her to be suspicious of everything and everyone. "Because someone should," she said finally, which was both true and not nearly the whole truth. "Now get down there. The night is coming, and if they are hunting, they will be moving." He nodded and descended into the cellar without further protest. Zara lowered the trapdoor and arranged the workbench back into its usual position, scattering tools and metal pieces across its surface, until no one could tell that anything unusual lay beneath. Then she returned to her forge and tried to focus on the work at hand, a set of hinges for a farmer 3 valleys over who had promised payment in smoked meat and grain. But her mind would not settle. She found herself listening for sounds in the forest, for the particular rhythm of orc hunters moving through underbrush. The Bloodstone clan were skilled trackers, but they were also arrogant, confident in their dominance of this territory. If Zane had truly lost them 3 days ago, they might have widened their search pattern, might be ranging far enough that they would not think to check a solitary forge that had always remained neutral in clan matters. Or they might come straight here, knowing that any orc who lived apart from the clan structure was already suspect, already potentially sympathetic to outsiders. The night deepened, and Zara kept the forge burning hot, kept her hammer ringing against the anvil. Work had always been her answer to uncertainty, the one thing she could control when everything else seemed to spiral beyond her grasp. The rhythmic strike of metal on metal was meditative, a pattern so deeply ingrained in her body that she could lose herself in it, could forget for moments at a time that she had a human cartographer hiding in her cellar and a clan of hunters potentially closing in. It was near midnight when she finally allowed the forge to bank down to coals. She made herself eat, though she had no appetite, and then she sat in the darkness of her workshop, listening. The forest at night was never truly silent. There were always the sounds of nocturnal creatures, the whisper of wind through leaves, the occasional crack of a branch settling. But there were no sounds of hunters, no indication that anyone was moving through her territory. She waited until she was certain, and then she lifted the trapdoor and descended into the cellar with a water skin and some of the dried meat from her own supplies. Zane was sitting with his back against the stone wall, his long legs drawn up to make himself fit in the cramped space. He looked up as she entered, and even in the dim light of the small oil lamp she had brought, she could see the weariness in his face. "Still alive, then," she said, which was perhaps not the most graceful greeting but was at least honest. "Still alive," he confirmed. He accepted the water and the food with quiet thanks, and she watched as he drank carefully, not gulping despite what must have been considerable thirst. Controlled, disciplined. These were good qualities for surviving difficult situations. "Tell me about these maps they took," she said, settling herself on an upturned crate that she used for storing certain ores. What was so valuable about them that the Bloodstone clan would want them? Zane swallowed a bite of dried meat before answering. They were detailed topographical maps of the entire frontier region. Water sources, game trails, good camping sites, strategic high points. The kind of information that could be valuable to anyone trying to move through the territory, whether for trade or for military purposes. "Or for raids," Zara said, understanding immediately. "They took them because they do not want humans to have that kind of knowledge about their territory, or they took them because they want to use the information themselves to plan their own movements." "Probably both," Zane agreed. He studied her for a moment, his gray eyes thoughtful. "You are not like them, though, the Bloodstone orcs. You are different." "I am an exile by choice," Zara said, and there was an edge to her voice that she did not quite intend. "I left my birth clan when I was 16 because I did not agree with their ways. I wanted to make things instead of breaking things. I wanted to build instead of destroy. My clan saw this as weakness, as betrayal of what it means to be orc. So I left, and I have been on my own since." "That must have been difficult," Zane said quietly. "To leave your family, your people, everything you knew." "It was necessary," Zara said, but even as she spoke the words, she felt the old ache of that loss. It had been 8 years since she had left, 8 years of making her own way, and there were still nights when she missed the simple certainty of clan life, even as she knew she could never return to it. "But we are not talking about me. We are talking about how to keep you alive long enough to get out of this territory." "Is there a way out?" Zane asked. "You said the Bloodstone clan would not give up the hunt." "There are always ways," Zara said, "but they require patience and planning. For now, you stay hidden. In a few days, If there has been no sign of hunters, we will talk about how to move you safely to a region where they have less influence." She saw him nod, accepting this plan because he had no better alternative. She should leave then, should go back upstairs and let him rest, but instead she found herself asking, "This mapping work you do, why? What drives a man to wander the frontier alone, charting territories that most people will never see?" Something shifted in his expression, a spark of enthusiasm that cut through the exhaustion. "Because there is so much we do not know," he said. "Because every time I climb a ridge and see a new valley spreading out below, every time I find a river that is not on any existing map, I am seeing something that adds to the sum total of human knowledge. I am making it possible for others to understand the world better, to move through it more safely. Maps are not just lines on paper. They are stories about the land, about how things connect, about where resources are and where dangers lie. They help people make better decisions." There was passion in his voice, genuine belief in what he was saying. Zara had not expected that. She had assumed that cartography was simply a trade like any other, a way to make a living. But the way Zane spoke about it suggested something deeper, something closer to calling or purpose. "You love it," she said, and it was not quite a question. "Yes," he said simply. "I know it is dangerous. I know that most people think I am foolish for taking the risks I take. But when I am out there, standing on the edge of the known world and looking into the unknown, I feel like I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Zara understood that feeling better than he probably realized. She felt it herself when she was working the forge, when she was taking raw ore and transforming it into something useful and beautiful. The sense of rightness, of alignment between one's actions and one's nature. It was rare, and it was precious, and she felt an unexpected kinship with this human who had stumbled into her life fleeing from her own kind. "Get some sleep," she said, standing up from the crate. "Tomorrow I will try to learn if there is any word of hunters in the area. The farmer who is expecting those hinges will be by in a few days, and he always has news from the surrounding valleys." "Zara," Zane said as she moved toward the ladder, and it was the first time he had spoken her name. She turned back to look at him. "Thank you, truly. I know this is a risk for you, and I will not forget it." She nodded, uncomfortable again with his gratitude, and climbed back up to her workshop. But as she lay on her sleeping mat that night, listening to the familiar sounds of the forest, she found herself thinking about gray eyes and passion for maps, and the way Zane had not flinched when he first saw her. Not really. He had been afraid, yes, but it had been the fear of someone in danger, not the visceral revulsion that she sometimes saw in human faces when they realized what she was. The next few days fell into an uneasy routine. Zara worked the forge during the daylight hours, keeping her schedule as normal as possible so as not to arouse suspicion if anyone was watching. At night, she would bring food and water down to Zane, and they would talk while he ate. She learned that he came from a small farming village, 3 weeks' travel to the east, that his father had been a surveyor for the local lord, and had taught him the basics of measurement and map-making. She learned that he had a younger sister who was married to a miller, and a mother who worried constantly about his wandering ways. "They think I should settle down, find a nice girl, start a farm," Zane said one evening, his tone wry. "They do not understand why I keep leaving, why I cannot seem to be content with a quiet life in one place." "Can you not be content?" Zara asked. She was working on repairing one of his boots, which had been badly damaged during his flight from the Bloodstone hunters. Her fingers were too large for delicate work, but she managed well enough with leather and strong thread. "I have tried," he admitted. After my father died, I stayed home for nearly a year, helping my mother, working the farm with my sister and her husband. But every morning I would wake up feeling like I was suffocating, like the walls of the village were pressing in on me. I needed to move, to see what was beyond the next hill. So I left again, and I think my mother has given up hope that I will ever truly come home. Perhaps home is not a place for you, Zara said, thinking of her own exile. Perhaps it is something you carry with you, something you find in the work rather than in the walls. Zane looked at her with an expression of surprise and recognition. Yes, he said slowly. Yes, that is exactly it. How did you understand that so clearly? Because it is the same for me, Zara said. She finished the last stitch on his boot and set it aside. I did not just leave my clan because I disagreed with their ways. I left because I could not breathe there. I could not be who I needed to be within their structure. Out here alone, I am more myself than I ever was surrounded by my own people. Does it get lonely? Zane asked quietly. Zara considered the question honestly. Sometimes, she admitted. There are times when I wish for someone to talk to, someone who understands. But loneliness is the price of freedom, and I have chosen to pay it. It does not have to be, Zane said. The price, I mean. People can be free and still have connection. It is just harder to find, that is all. Before Zara could respond to that, she heard something that made her go completely still. Voices, distant but distinct, speaking in the guttural language of orcs. She held up a hand sharply, cutting off whatever Zane had been about to say next, and moved silently to the ladder. Not a sound, she whispered down to him. They are here. She lowered the trapdoor as quietly as possible and rearranged the workbench with practiced efficiency. Then she moved to the entrance of her forge and stepped outside, forcing herself to appear calm and unconcerned as 3 bloodstone warriors emerged from the tree line. She recognized their leader, a massive male named Grok who had a reputation for cruelty, even among a clan known for its violence. His skin was darker than hers, nearly olive in tone, and his tusks were filed to sharp points in the warrior fashion. He carried a war axe that had seen plenty of use, and his eyes were cold as they swept over her forge. Grok, she said, keeping her voice neutral. What brings the Bloodstone clan to my territory? We are hunting a human, Grok said without preamble, a spy who was mapping our lands. He fled in this direction 3 days past. Have you seen any sign of him? I see very few people out here, Zara said carefully. Humans even less so. What makes you think he would come this way? We tracked him to the ridge above your forge, Grok said. His eyes narrowed. Then the trail went cold. Convenient that, very convenient. Zara felt her muscles tense but forced herself to remain outwardly relaxed. If he was on the ridge, he could have gone in any direction from there. The wind has been strong these past days. It would scatter any trail. Perhaps, Grok said. He moved closer, and she could smell the blood and smoke that seemed to cling permanently to the Bloodstone warriors. Or perhaps he found help. Perhaps someone who lives outside clan law, someone who might sympathize with humans, might have given him shelter. The accusation was clear, and Zara met it with a steady gaze. I follow no clan law, this is true, but I also invite no trouble to my door. I work my forge, I trade fairly, and I bother no one. If your human came to me seeking help, I would have turned him away, because harboring a fugitive from the Bloodstone clan would be suicide, and I am not ready to die. Show me your forge, Grok demanded. Zara's heart was hammering, but she gestured toward the building with apparent unconcern. Look wherever you wish. I have nothing to hide. The search was thorough and invasive. The 3 warriors went through every corner of her workspace, examining her supplies, her tools, her living quarters. One of them even climbed into the rafters to check for hiding spaces above. but none of them thought to look beneath the workbench, beneath the seemingly solid floor. Why would they? It was a forge, not a dwelling. Any storage would logically be above ground where it could be easily accessed for work. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Grok finally grunted in what might have been satisfaction or disappointment. "It seems you are telling the truth," he said. "The human is not here." "I told you as much," Zara said. Grok turned to leave, but then he paused at the entrance and looked back at her. "You walk a narrow path, Zara Emberforge. You rejected clan life, rejected the old ways. Some in the Bloodstone say you are traitor to all orc kind, that you should be driven out or killed. I have argued against this, because you cause no trouble and your metalwork has value. But if I were to discover that you had aided humans against your own people, even I could not protect you. Remember that." "I will remember," Zara said quietly. She watched them disappear back into the forest, and only when she was certain they were truly gone did she allow herself to breathe fully again. She waited another hour, working the forge with hands that shook slightly from the aftermath of fear and adrenaline, before she finally opened the trapdoor. Zane was exactly where she had left him, pressed against the far wall of the cellar, his face pale but his eyes alert. "They are gone," he whispered. "They are gone," she confirmed. "But Zane, this is worse than I thought. They are not just hunting you, they are suspicious of me specifically. Grok all but accused me of harboring you." "Then I need to leave," Zane said immediately. "I cannot put you at more risk." "You have already done far more than anyone could have expected." "And go where?" Zara demanded. "You have no supplies, no maps, no weapons. You would last perhaps a day in the forest before they found you again. No, we need a better plan." "What kind of plan?" Zara thought quickly, turning over possibilities. "There is a human settlement, Millbrook, 2 days' travel to the southeast. It is on the edge of Bloodstone territory, too small for them to bother raiding but large enough to have some protection. If we can get you there, you would be safe enough to resupply and make your way back to your own lands." 2 days' travel, Zane repeated. "Could we make it without being seen?" "Not if we move during the day," Zara said. "But if we travel at night, keep to the difficult terrain where they are less likely to patrol, we might have a chance. It would be hard going, especially for you. You are not recovered from your flight and you have been in that cellar for days now, but it is the best option we have." "When would we leave?" "Tomorrow night," Zara decided. "That gives me a day to prepare supplies and to make sure they have truly moved their search elsewhere. Can you manage 1 more day in the cellar?" "I can manage," Zane said. He looked at her with those storm-gray eyes, and there was something in his expression that made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "You are taking a tremendous risk for me. If they catch us together, there will be no explaining it away." "Then we had better not get caught," Zara said with a confidence she did not entirely feel. The next day was one of the longest of Zara's life. She went through the motions of her work, but her mind was constantly planning, calculating routes and risks, and what they would need for 2 days of hard travel through rough country. She packed dried meat and journey bread, filled water skins, gathered medical supplies in case either of them was injured. She also selected weapons, a long hunting knife for Zane and her own war hammer, which she had forged herself years ago but rarely had cause to carry. As evening approached, she allowed herself to acknowledge what she had been avoiding thinking about all day. She was about to abandon her forge, her home, everything she had built over the past 8 years. Because even if they successfully got Zane to Millbrook, even if the Bloodstone clan never learned the truth, she could not come back here. Grok's warning had been clear enough. She was already under suspicion, and any further unusual activity would seal her fate. The realization was crushing and liberating in equal measure. She would lose the stability she had built, but she would also be free of the constant wariness, the need to walk the narrow path between human and orc worlds without ever truly belonging to either. When full dark had fallen and she was certain no one was watching, she opened the trapdoor for the last time. Zane climbed out stiffly, his muscles cramped from days of confinement. In the lamplight of the forge, she could see that he was thinner than he had been, his face drawn with the strain of the past few days. "We need to move quickly and quietly," she said, handing him a pack and the knife she had selected. "Stay close to me, do exactly as I say, and do not speak unless absolutely necessary. Sound carries in the forest at night." He nodded, and they set out into the darkness. Zara led them not on any established trail, but through the deep forest, navigating by instinct and memory through terrain that would be treacherous for someone unfamiliar with it. Several times she had to help Zane over difficult obstacles, a fallen log too high to easily climb, a stream too wide to jump, a rocky scramble that required strength he had not yet recovered. Each time she grasped his hand or steadied his arm, she was acutely aware of the warmth of his skin, the solidity of his body. She had rarely touched another person in the years since her exile, and never with this kind of care, this sense of mutual dependence. It stirred something in her that she had tried to bury, a longing for connection that went beyond simple conversation. They traveled through the night, stopping only briefly to rest and drink water. Zane kept pace better than she had expected, his determination carrying him through what must have been considerable discomfort. As dawn approached, Zara found them shelter in a dense thicket of brambles, a natural hollow where they could hide during the daylight hours. "We rest here until nightfall," she said quietly. "It is not comfortable, but it is hidden." They settled into the cramped space, and despite her intention to keep watch, Zara found herself drifting in and out of uneasy sleep. Several times she jerked awake, certain she had heard the sound of hunters, only to realize it was the normal noises of the forest. Each time, she found that Zane was also awake, watching her with an expression she could not quite read in the filtered daylight that made it through the brambles. "You should sleep," he said during one of these moments. "You have been keeping watch over me for days now. Let me take a turn." "You would not know what to listen for," Zara said, but even as she spoke, she felt the exhaustion pulling at her. She had been running on nervous energy and determination, but it could only carry her so far. "Then teach me," Zane said. "Tell me what sounds are dangerous and what sounds are normal. I am quick to learn." So she did, describing the difference between the movements of deer and the movements of orc hunters, between the calls of normal birds and the signals that warriors sometimes used to communicate. And then, because she could not keep her eyes open any longer, she let herself truly sleep, trusting in a way she had not trusted anyone in years. When she woke, the sun was past its zenith, and Zane was still keeping watch, his gray eyes alert and his body positioned between her and the opening in the brambles. The realization that he had been guarding her while she slept did something strange to her heart, made it feel both heavier and lighter at once. "Any trouble?" she asked quietly. "A patrol passed by about 2 hours ago," Zane said. "4 warriors, moving quickly to the northeast. They did not come close enough to see this hiding spot." "You did well," Zara said, and saw pleasure flash across his face at the praise. It occurred to her that he probably received little enough acknowledgement for his work, wandering alone through dangerous territories. "We will move again as soon as it is fully dark. Millbrook should be only a few hours from here if we make good time." "And then what?" Zane asked. "What will you do once I am safely in Millbrook? It was the question she had been avoiding asking herself. "I cannot go back to my forge," she said slowly. "The Bloodstone clan will be watching for any unusual activity, and my disappearance at the same time as yours will only confirm their suspicions. I will have to move on, find somewhere else to settle." "Come with me," Zane said suddenly. "Back to my village, or to one of the frontier towns where there are people who do not automatically see orcs as enemies. You could set up a new forge, make a new start." Zara shook her head. "It is a kind offer, but you do not understand what it would mean. Orcs are not welcome in human settlements. I would be tolerated at best, driven out at worst." "Not everywhere," Zane insisted. "There are places on the frontier where people are more concerned with survival than with old prejudices. Places where someone with your skills would be valued regardless of what you look like." "You have a great deal of faith in human nature," Zara said, and could not quite keep the bitterness from her voice. "I have faith in you," Zane said quietly. "And I have seen how you live, Zara. Alone, isolated, always watching over your shoulder. Is that really the life you want? Or would you rather take a chance on something different, even if it is risky?" The question hung between them in the filtered light of the bramble thicket. Zara did not have an answer, not yet. But something in her chest had loosened at his words, at the simple statement that he had faith in her. They set out again as soon as darkness fell, and this time the travel was easier. They were out of the heart of Bloodstone territory, and the terrain was less rugged. Zara could see Zane moving with more confidence now, his body remembering its strength after days of confinement and inactivity. They reached the outskirts of Millbrook just before midnight. It was a small settlement, perhaps 20 buildings clustered around a central square with a well. Lamplight showed in a few windows, but most of the village was dark and quiet. Zara stopped at the tree line, suddenly reluctant to go further. "This is as far as I should go," she said. "You will be safe from here." But Zane did not move toward the village. Instead, he turned to face her fully, and in the moonlight his eyes were very bright. "Come with me," he said again. "Please. I know it is asking a great deal. I know you have no reason to trust that humans will treat you fairly, but I also know that I do not want to say goodbye to you. Not yet. Not when we have barely had a chance to really know each other." "Zane," Zara said, and stopped, because she did not know what to say. Everything he was suggesting was foolish, dangerous, against all the lessons she had learned about keeping herself separate and safe. But it was also tempting in a way that terrified her. "I am asking you to take a chance," Zane said. He reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and took her hand in both of his. His hands were warm and calloused from work, and the touch sent a shiver through her entire body. "Not because I can promise it will be easy, but because I think we could both use a little less loneliness in our lives. Because I want to see where this could go, whatever this is between us." "You barely know me," Zara said, but her voice was weak even to her own ears. "I know that you are brave enough to forge your own path when your people rejected you. I know that you risked your life to save a stranger who had no claim on your kindness. I know that when you talk about your work, your whole face lights up with passion. I know that I have felt more myself in the past few days, hiding in your cellar and talking with you at night, than I have felt in months of traveling alone. That is enough to make me want to know more." Zara looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between her green skin and his paler tone, at the way his fingers curled around hers with such gentle certainty. She thought about her empty forge, about the years of isolation, about the constant wariness that had become such a part of her that she barely noticed it anymore. And she thought about the possibility of something different, something that involved connection and trust and maybe, eventually, belonging. "1 month," she heard herself say. I will come with you for 1 month. If after that time I feel I need to leave, you will not try to stop me or convince me otherwise." "Agreed." The smile that broke across Zane's face was like sunrise. "Agreed," he said. 1 month, and Zara, thank you." They entered Millbrook together, and if the night watchman who met them at the edge of the village was surprised to see a human and an orc traveling together, he was wise enough not to comment on it. He directed them to the local inn, where the proprietor was less circumspect in her shock, but was willing enough to rent them a room when Zane paid in advance with the few coins he had managed to keep during his flight from the Bloodstone clan. The room was small and simple, with 2 narrow beds and a washstand. Zara felt absurdly self-conscious as she set down her pack, aware that this was the first time she had been in such close quarters with anyone since leaving her clan. "You should sleep," Zane said, seeming to sense her discomfort. "Tomorrow we will figure out supplies and where we go from here, but tonight we are safe. We made it." Zara nodded and moved to one of the beds, but sleep would not come easily. She lay in the darkness, listening to Zane's breathing settle into the deep rhythm of sleep, and wondered what she had agreed to. 1 month. It seemed both impossibly long and frighteningly short. The next few days in Millbrook were strange and awkward and surprisingly pleasant in turns. Zane used the last of his funds to buy basic supplies and to send a message to his family letting them know he was alive. Zara kept mostly to the inn, uncomfortable with the stares and whispers that followed her whenever she ventured out into the village. But the innkeeper's wife, a pragmatic woman named Sarah, seemed to take Zara's presence in stride after the initial shock wore off. "You are the one who helped Zane escape the Bloodstone clan," Sarah said one morning when she brought breakfast up to the room. It was not quite a question. "I gave him shelter," Zara admitted carefully. "Then you are welcome here," Sarah said firmly. "Any friend of travelers is a friend of this inn. And between you and me, dear, half the people in this village are running from something or trying to make a new start. We do not judge here, not the way they do in the older settlements." It was the kindest thing a human had said to Zara in years, and she found herself blinking back unexpected tears. "Thank you," she managed. Zane returned that afternoon with news that he had secured them passage with a trading caravan that was heading east in 2 days' time. "They are going to a town called Ferndale," he explained. "It is on the very edge of the frontier, and it has a reputation for being open to anyone who can contribute to the community. I thought we might try there." "We," Zara repeated, testing the word. It felt foreign and intimate at once. "We," Zane confirmed. He sat down on the edge of his bed, facing her. "Unless you have changed your mind about the month." "No," Zara said, "I have not changed my mind." What she did not say was that she was already worried about what would happen at the end of that month, already feeling the pull of connection that was growing stronger each day she spent in his company. They had fallen into an easy companionship, talking late into the night about everything and nothing. He told her stories of the places he had mapped, and she told him about the intricacies of metalwork. He asked her questions about orc culture that no human had ever bothered to ask before, and she found herself wanting to answer, wanting to share that part of herself with him. The journey to Ferndale took over a week with the caravan, which moved at the pace of the laden wagons and stopped frequently to trade at small settlements along the way. Zara and Zane traveled on foot, keeping mostly to themselves, but occasionally joining the evening campfires where the traders swapped stories and news. It was during one of these evenings that Zara noticed the way some of the humans looked at them, not with hostility exactly, but with curiosity and a kind of calculation. She and Zane had been careful not to show any particular intimacy in public, but even so, The fact that they traveled together was unusual enough to draw attention. "They are wondering about us," Zane said quietly as they walked the perimeter of the camp later that night. "About whether we are friends or something more." "And what would you tell them if they asked?" Zara asked, surprised at her own boldness. Zane was quiet for a moment. "I would tell them that I am still figuring that out myself," he said finally. "But that I hope very much it will be the latter." Zara's heart did something complicated in her chest. "Zane, I am an orc. You are human. Even if there were not centuries of hostility between our peoples, there are practical considerations. We are not made for the same kinds of lives." "Are we not?" Zane challenged. "You said yourself that home is not a place, but something you carry with you. I think we are made for the same kind of life, Zara. A life of making our own way, of choosing our own paths. The only question is whether we want to do that separately or together." They had reached the edge of the firelight, and Zara turned to face him properly. In the flickering shadows, he looked both vulnerable and determined, and she was struck again by how much she had come to care about this human who had stumbled into her forge barely 2 weeks ago. "I do not know how to do this," she admitted. "This thing between us. There has never been anyone I wanted to," she trailed off, frustrated by her inability to articulate what she was feeling. "Neither have I," Zane said. "Not really, not in a way that mattered. But I would like to try if you would, to see where this goes. No expectations, no promises beyond the month you agreed to. Just two people who enjoy each other's company and want to see if it could be more." Zara nodded slowly. "I would like that," she said, and was rewarded with one of his sunrise smiles. Ferndale, when they finally reached it, was larger than Millbrook, but still modest by most standards. It sprawled across a river valley, with fields spreading out from the central cluster of buildings. What struck Zara immediately was the diversity of the people she saw. Yes, most were human, but there were also a handful of other orcs, some dwarves working a mining claim to the north, and even a family of halflings who ran the largest general store. "It is a frontier town in truth," Zane explained as they made their way through the streets. "Most of the people here are refugees or exiles or seekers who did not fit in the more established settlements. They are less concerned with what you are than with what you can contribute." They found lodging at a boarding house run by an elderly dwarf woman named Helga, who looked Zara up and down once, and then quoted them a weekly rate without comment. Over the next few days, Zane began making inquiries about work, reconnecting with the cartography networks that operated across the frontier. Zara, meanwhile, explored the town more carefully, assessing whether there might be a place for her here. She found her answer in the northern quarter, where there was a defunct forge that had been abandoned when the previous smith died the year before. The building was in decent condition, and the equipment, while old, was serviceable. When she inquired at the town hall about the possibility of renting it, the clerk, a harried-looking human woman, seemed almost relieved. "We have been trying to find a new smith for months," she said. "The nearest one is 2 days' ride away, and it is causing real problems for the community. If you are qualified and willing, the council would likely offer you very favorable terms on the building." Within a week, Zara found herself the improbable owner of a forge in a human town, with more work orders than she could immediately handle. Farmers needed tools repaired, builders needed nails and hinges, and the local militia wanted weapons maintained. She threw herself into the work with fierce dedication, partly because she had always found solace in labor and partly because it kept her from thinking too hard about the fact that her 1-month agreement with Zane was rapidly passing. They had settled into a routine that felt almost domestic. They shared the room at Helga's boarding house, though they still slept in separate beds. They took meals together when their schedules allowed, and in the evenings, they would walk along the river or sit outside the forge while she worked late, talking about their days and their plans and their pasts. There had been no repeat of the almost confession from the night at the caravan camp. No discussion of feelings or futures beyond the immediate. But there was a growing intimacy in the small moments. The way Zane would bring her tea without being asked when she was working late, the way she would repair his boots or his tools without comment, the way they had learned to navigate each other's space and moods with increasing ease. It was on a cool evening 3 weeks into their stay in Ferndale that things shifted. Zara was working late at the forge, finishing a complicated piece of ironwork that needed to be delivered the next day. She was so focused on the task that she did not hear Zane enter, did not realize he was there until he spoke her name. She looked up, startled, and saw that he was standing just inside the doorway with an expression that made her pulse quicken. "Zane, is something wrong?" "No," he said. "Nothing is wrong, but I need to say something, and I need to say it now, before I lose my nerve." Zara set down her hammer and turned to face him fully, wiping the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "All right," she said cautiously. "The month is almost up," Zane said, moving closer. 5 more days and you will have fulfilled your agreement. You will be free to leave if that is what you want. But Zara, I do not want you to leave. I want you to stay, not because of some agreement or obligation, but because you want to be here. Because you want to be with me." "Zane," she started, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish," he said. "I know this is complicated. I know there are 100 reasons why this could not work, why we should not even try. But I also know that I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. When I am with you, I feel seen in a way I have never felt seen before. You understand the parts of me that most people think are strange or impractical. You make me want to be better, to work harder, to build something lasting instead of always wandering." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I am not good at pretty words. I map rivers and mountains, not emotions. But I am trying to tell you that I care about you deeply, and that I want to see where this could go if we let it. I want to build a life with you, here in Ferndale or wherever you want to be. I want—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words, and Zara found herself moving toward him without conscious decision. She had spent 3 weeks trying not to examine too closely what she was feeling, trying not to name the warmth that bloomed in her chest when he smiled at her, or the way she looked forward to their evening conversations more than anything else in her day. But standing here in her forge, watching him stumble over this confession, she could no longer avoid the truth. She cared for him, more than cared. She was falling in love with this human mapmaker who had stumbled into her life fleeing death, and who had somehow become essential to her happiness in a matter of weeks. "I want to kiss you," Zane said suddenly, bluntly, and the unexpected directness of it shocked a laugh out of Zara. "You?" she asked, and was pleased that her voice was steady even though her heart was racing. "Yes," he said. "I have wanted to for days now, but I did not know if you felt the same way, if you would even want that with a human." "I have never kissed anyone," Zara admitted. "It is not something my people do much. Physical affection is not a big part of orc culture, but I find that I am curious. And I find that I care very little right now about what my people do or do not do." She saw the hope flare in his gray eyes. "So can I?" he asked. "Can I kiss you?" For answer, Zara closed the distance between them. She was taller than him by a few inches, broader by a good margin, and she had to angle her head carefully to avoid him catching a tusk. But when his lips met hers, soft and warm and tentative, her mind went entirely blank of everything except sensation. It was nothing like she had expected. She had seen humans kiss, brief pecks of affection or greeting, and had assumed it was much the same as the nose touch that some orc clans used to show fondness. But this was entirely different. This was warm and electric and made her entire body feel like it was singing. His hands came up to cup her face, gentle despite the calluses, and she let herself lean into the touch, marveling at the simple pleasure of contact. When they finally pulled apart, she felt breathless and stunned. "So this is what I was missing," she said wonderingly. Zane laughed, a sound of pure joy, and rested his forehead against hers. "Was it all right?" he asked. "I know your tusks make it awkward. It was perfect," Zara interrupted. "Do it again." So he did, and this time she participated more actively, learning the rhythm of it, the give and take. She wrapped her arms around him carefully, mindful of her strength, and felt him relax against her with a sigh of contentment. They stood there in the glow of the forge, kissing like the world outside did not exist, and Zara felt something in her chest that she had not felt in years. Hope. When they finally separated enough to talk, she found that she was smiling, truly smiling, in a way she could not remember doing since she was a child. "I am staying," she said. "Not for a month, but for as long as you will have me. I want to see where this goes, Zane. I want to try." "Thank God," Zane breathed. "I was so afraid you would leave." "I was afraid too," Zara admitted. "Of wanting this, of letting myself care. But I think you were right. Loneliness does not have to be the price of freedom. Sometimes freedom means choosing to share your life with someone." They went back to their room at Helga's that night, walking close together. Not quite holding hands, but close enough that their arms brushed with each step. Helga took one look at their faces when they came in and smiled knowingly, but said nothing, simply handed them their key and wished them a good night. In the privacy of their room, they kissed again, longer and deeper, learning each other with a patience born of knowing they had time now. Time to figure out how this would work. Time to build something real. When they finally parted to sleep still in separate beds, neither of them ready yet to cross that final line, Zara lay awake for a long time, touching her lips with wondering fingers and thinking about how much her life had changed in a matter of weeks. The next morning, she woke to find Zane already up and dressed, sitting at the small table by the window with papers spread out before him. She recognized the careful line work of his map-making, the precise notations and measurements. "What are you working on?" she asked, coming to look over his shoulder. "A new project," Zane said. He sounded excited, energized in a way she had not heard since before the Bloodstone incident. "The town council has commissioned a complete map of the Ferndale region, including all the surrounding settlements and resources. It will take months to do properly, but it is exactly the kind of work I have been hoping for. Detailed, comprehensive, useful." "That is wonderful," Zara said, genuinely pleased for him. "And it means I will be based here," Zane added, looking up at her with significance. "No more long wandering trips, at least not for a while. I will be able to explore the region thoroughly while still coming home each night." Home. The word hung between them, full of promise and possibility. Zara reached out and ran her fingers through his hair, marveling at the softness of it. "I am glad," she said simply. They fell into a new rhythm after that. Zara worked her forge during the day, building a reputation in Ferndale as a smith whose work was both reliable and reasonably priced. Zane spent his days surveying the region, returning each evening with new stories and observations. They moved out of Helga's boarding house and into a small cottage that came with the forge property, making it truly their own space. It was not always easy. There were still people in Ferndale who viewed Zara with suspicion or distrust, who could not see past the green skin and tusks to the person beneath. There were nights when she felt the weight of isolation, even surrounded by people, and wondered if she had made the right choice. But then Zane would come home, would smile at her with that particular warmth reserved only for her, would tell her about his day and ask about hers, and the doubts would fade. They had been in Ferndale for 2 months when the first real challenge came. Zara was working in the forge when a group of 4 humans, strangers to the town, came in demanding service. She could smell the alcohol on them from across the room and knew immediately that this was not going to be a normal customer interaction. "We need our weapons sharpened," the leader said. He was a big man, thick with muscle, wearing the kind of scarred leather armor that spoke of mercenary work. "And we need it done now." "I can have them ready by tomorrow afternoon," Zara said, keeping her voice level and professional. "I am in the middle of another commission right now." "Tomorrow afternoon is not good enough," the man said. He stepped closer, deliberately invading her space. "We are leaving at dawn and we need them sharp before we go, so you are going to stop what you are doing and take care of us first." "I do not work that way," Zara said. She set down her hammer carefully, aware that this situation was escalating. "First come, first served. You can wait your turn like everyone else, or you can go elsewhere for your sharpening." The man's face darkened. "Maybe you do not understand how this works, Orc. You do what paying customers tell you to do. Or maybe we explain it in a way you will better understand." His hand moved to his sword, and Zara felt the old battle instincts rising. She had not trained as a warrior, but she was an orc, and the basics of combat were in her blood. She shifted her weight, preparing to defend herself if necessary, and saw the other 3 men spreading out to flank her. "Is there a problem here?" The new voice was calm but carried an edge that made everyone turn. Zane was standing in the doorway of the forge, and he was not alone. Behind him stood Sarah from the Millbrook Inn, who turned out to be visiting relatives in Ferndale, and 3 of the local farmers who Zara had done work for over the past weeks. The mercenary leader looked at the new arrivals and recalculated his odds. "We were just trying to get some work done," he said, but his hand moved away from his sword. "Then you can leave your weapons and come back tomorrow afternoon like Zara said," Zane replied. His voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath it. "Or you can leave now and find another smith." "Your choice." The mercenaries chose to leave, grumbling but not willing to start a fight when outnumbered. After they were gone, Zara found herself surrounded by her unexpected defenders, all of whom seemed to want to make sure she was all right. "Thank you," she said, looking at each of them in turn. "I could have handled them, but your support means more than you know." "You are one of us now," one of the farmers said gruffly. "We look after our own in Ferndale." It was a simple statement, but it made Zara's throat tight with emotion. One of us. She belonged here. It was a feeling she had not expected to find again after leaving her clan, and she treasured it all the more for its unexpectedness. That night, lying in the bed she now shared with Zane, she turned to him and said, "I love you." "I should have said it before now, but I was afraid. I'm not afraid anymore." Zane's face in the moonlight was soft with wonder. "I love you too," he said. "I have loved you since you looked at me over your anvil that first night and decided to help a stranger even though it put you at risk. I just did not have the words for it yet." They made love for the first time that night, slowly and carefully, learning each other's bodies with the same attention to detail they brought to their crafts. Zara had been nervous about it, uncertain how their differences would translate to physical intimacy. But Zane was patient and attentive, and she found that the awkwardness quickly gave way to pleasure and connection. Afterwards, lying tangled together in the sheets, Zara thought about how far she had come from that night when a desperate cartographer had stumbled into her forge. She had expected to spend her life alone, had convinced herself that isolation was the price of choosing her own path. But she had been wrong. The price of freedom was not loneliness. It was courage, the courage to risk connection, to let someone in, to believe that something better was possible even when all the evidence suggested otherwise. The seasons turned, and Zara and Zane built their life together in Ferndale. The forge prospered, becoming known throughout the region for the quality of its work. Zane completed his comprehensive map of the area, which was purchased by multiple settlements and even by the regional governor's office. They faced challenges, prejudice from some, economic difficulties during a particularly harsh winter, a brief scare when Bloodstone raiders were spotted in the area, but they faced them together. It was on a spring morning, exactly 1 year after that first kiss in the forge, that Zane asked her to marry him. They were sitting by the river, watching the sunrise and sharing breakfast before the day's work began. He had been nervous all morning, fumbling with his bread and dropping his cup, and Zara had been trying to figure out what was bothering him when he suddenly dropped to one knee on the riverbank. "Zara Emberforge," he said, pulling a ring from his pocket. It was clearly his own work, made from a piece of iron she had forged and shaped into a simple band. "I know that marriage is not traditional in Orc culture. I know that we are already building a life together, and that a ceremony will not change the reality of what we are to each other. But I want to make a public declaration anyway. I want to stand up in front of the whole town and say that you are my choice, my partner, my love. Will you marry me?" Zara looked at the ring, at his hopeful face, at the river flowing past them toward unknown territories, and felt the rightness of the moment settle into her bones. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." The wedding was held in the town square a month later, officiated by the town mayor and attended by what seemed like half of Ferndale. Sarah from Millbrook made the journey to be there, as did Helga and the farmers who had stood up for Zara in the forge. Even a few of the more open-minded orcs from other clans attended, drawn by curiosity and by rumors of an orc woman who had somehow made a life among humans without losing herself. As Zara stood beside Zane and spoke her vows, she thought about that first kiss, about the wonder of discovering something she had never known she was missing. Physical affection, yes, but more than that. Partnership, understanding. The sense of being seen and valued for exactly who she was, no pretense or apology required. "I promise to forge my life with yours," she said, using language that felt true to who they both were. "To work beside you, to challenge you when you need it, to support you always. To be your home as you have become mine." And when Zane kissed her in front of the entire gathered crowd, when he pulled her close despite the difference in their heights and sizes, and ignored the tusks that made it awkward and the green skin that marked her as other, Zara felt the same electric joy as that first time in the forge. She also felt something new, the absolute certainty that this was where she belonged, that she had found her place in the world not by denying who she was, but by having the courage to be fully herself with someone who loved her for it. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and more food than any reasonable gathering required. Zara danced with Zane, laughing at their attempts to coordinate given their size difference, and then danced with Sarah and Helga, and several of the human women who had become her friends. She even danced with one of the visiting orcs, an older female who told her quietly that what she had done, the life she had built, gave hope to others who felt trapped by clan expectations. As the party wound down and she and Zane finally made their way back to their cottage, walking hand in hand through the lamp-lit streets, Zara felt a contentment she had never experienced before. Not the contentment of resignation or acceptance, but the contentment that came from actively choosing joy, from building something real with someone who mattered. Happy? Zane asked as they reached their door. Very, Zara said. She pulled him close for another kiss, still marveling at how natural it felt now, how perfectly they fit together despite all the ways they were different. So this is what I was missing, she said again, echoing her words from that first kiss but with deeper understanding now. Not just the physical affection, but all of it, the partnership, the building together, the sense of home. You are not missing it anymore, Zane pointed out, smiling. No, Zara agreed. I am not missing it anymore. They went inside together, closing the door on the outside world, and in the privacy of their home, they celebrated their marriage the way they had learned to celebrate everything, with honesty, with passion, with the deep and abiding knowledge that they had both taken a tremendous risk and been rewarded with something more precious than either of them had dared to hope for. The years that followed were not perfect. There were still moments of prejudice, still challenges that came from being an interspecies couple in a world not entirely ready for such things. But there were also triumphs and joys, and the steady accumulation of shared experiences that made their bond stronger with each passing season. Zara's forge became one of the most successful in the region, and Zane's maps were sought after by explorers and settlers across the frontier. They bought land and expanded the cottage, adding a proper workshop for Zane and improving the forge equipment for Zara. And when, 3 years after their wedding, Zara discovered she was pregnant, a rare occurrence for interspecies couples, but not, apparently, impossible, they faced that new challenge the same way they had faced everything else. Together, with courage and hope and the absolute certainty that they could handle whatever came their way. Their daughter was born in the spring, with Zara's green skin and Zane's gray eyes, with small tusks that would grow more prominent as she aged, and her father's talent for observation and detail. They named her Zena, a blending of both their names, and raised her in Ferndale among humans and orcs and dwarves and halflings, teaching her that she belonged to all those worlds and none of them, that her identity was hers to forge, just as they had forged their own. On quiet evenings, when the day's work was done and Zena was asleep in her cradle, Zara and Zane would sit together outside the forge, watching the stars emerge and talking about their days and their dreams. And sometimes, Zara would think back to that night when a desperate cartographer had stumbled into her isolated forge, fleeing death and seeking help from the last person most humans would trust. She would think about how close she had come to turning him away, to protecting herself rather than taking a risk on a stranger. And she would feel grateful, profoundly and deeply grateful, that she had been brave enough to help, to open her door and her life to possibility. Because in doing so, she had discovered what she had been missing all those years of isolation. Not just physical affection, though the kisses and the touch were wonderful, but connection, partnership, belonging, the sense of being fully seen and fully loved for exactly who she was. The knowledge that home was not a place or a clan or a building, but something you built with another person, one choice at a time, one risk at a time, one kiss at a time. What are you thinking about? Zane asked, reaching over to take her hand. About how lucky we are, Zara said. About how glad I am that you stumbled into my forge that night. I am glad too, Zane said, raising her hand to his lips and kissing her knuckles. Every single day I am glad. And as they sat there together under the vast frontier sky, surrounded by the life they had built and the future they were creating, Zara knew with absolute certainty that this love, this partnership, this brave choice to reach across the boundaries that separated their peoples, was the finest thing she had ever forged. More precious than any sword, more useful than any tool, more beautiful than any decorative piece she had ever crafted. It was a life built on trust and risk, and the willingness to believe that something better was possible. And it was everything she had never known she was missing, and everything she would never take for granted again. The moonlight silvered the rooftops of Ferndale, and in the distance, she could hear the river flowing steadily toward new territories, new possibilities, new frontiers waiting to be mapped and explored. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys, its own opportunities for growth and connection. But tonight, this moment, this perfect contentment of sitting beside the person she loved in the home they had built together, this was enough. This was everything. Zara squeezed Zane's hand, and he squeezed back, and no words were necessary to communicate what they both felt. They had found what they were searching for, even when they had not known they were searching. They had discovered that the opposite of loneliness was not simply company, but true partnership. They had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to risk connection despite fear. And they had built, through 1,000 small choices and acts of trust, a love that transcended the boundaries of species and prejudice and expectation. As the night deepened around them, and the last lights of Ferndale winked out one by one, Zara and Zane made their way inside to their bed, to their sleeping daughter, to the life they had chosen. And if Zara paused at the threshold to kiss her husband one more time, marveling still at the simple pleasure of it, at the way something so small could contain so much meaning, well, that was between them and the stars bearing witness overhead. She had spent so many years missing something she did not even know existed, but she was not missing it anymore. She had found it, claimed it, built a life around it. And every day, every kiss, every shared moment was a reminder that taking that risk, opening her door to a desperate stranger, saying yes to possibility, it had been the best decision she had ever made. The one that had transformed her from a solitary smith forging alone in the wilderness to a woman who knew what it meant to be fully loved, fully seen, fully alive. And that was worth everything, worth any risk, worth facing down any prejudice or challenge the world might throw at them. Because this love, this partnership, this brave and beautiful life they were building together, it was what she had been missing all along. And now that she had found it, she would never let it go.